It seems that now that China has broken their agreement for getting Hong Kong back, that the world has finally just had enough of China's complete authoritarian dictatorial regime and is putting their foot down and saying, fuck it, we can't take this anymore, we can't excuse this anymore. Now, real quick, and I hate that I have to mention this every fucking video I talk about China. When I say China, I specifically mean the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. I am not talking about the average person, the average citizen in China who has to survive under that fucking boot. I'm talking about the government and the people in charge, not the average Chinese citizen. Okay? Let's move on. I think that this has been something that's been building for a while now, especially since COVID. At this point, I think that the same people that believe that COVID was not man-made are the same people that think that Jeffrey Epstein really did kill himself. It was very obvious that COVID was a man-made thing that was made in China. The debate still revolves around, did Wuhan make it as a weapon, or were they just experimenting and this is something that they lost control of and it got out? That one I'm willing to throw a bone and say that this wasn't intentional because we haven't found any intent yet. But it's very obvious that this was a man-made manufactured disease, and people have been having negative sentiments about China since then, especially because of how China handled it, i.e., well, if we're going to get it, we're going to spread it everywhere. And it's just been little things that have been building since then that China has done that have just made people really, really pissed off. The border skirmish with India didn't do them any favors. Just all the trying to play it as if this was an American disease that we brought into China probably didn't help them. Trump's been going on about China for years, and it finally feels like the rest of the world is starting to catch up. I've known for the longest time that China is a shithole, and that China, if we don't do anything to curtail how just far and wide China is reaching, that they would amass basically an uncontrollable force, and I still am not sure if we're getting them in time, but this is definitely going to slow them down. You've got countries pulling out from, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, Huawei's 5G, not for conspiracy theory reasons, but because of the fact that it's a Chinese company. You have countries all over the world saying, debating about whether or not to ban TikTok because they view it as Chinese spyware. You have America pulling out of the WHO, which, thank you, Trump, I really appreciate that one. And it's all because of either these being Chinese companies or because the influence from China is so great that they are detrimental to being part of them or having that product in the country. With reference to Huawei and TikTok, yeah, even if they aren't literally Chinese spyware in the moment, China is a communist country. I can't believe I have to explain this to people that say they are communists, but seize the means of production is a thing. We saw that with the fucking masks, the medical masks in China. The U.S. has a bunch of factories in China that produce medical masks, And as soon as this pandemic began, China just snapped them up and took them for itself. They were gracious enough to give us one plane pallet back, and the Democrats praised them as the ultimate sacrifice that China made for our country. I'm sitting there going, those were ours, you fuckers. You took them. And that's how Chinese companies work. Huawei recently released a thing that said, oh, no, 99% of our company is employee-owned, only 0.5% or something to that ballpark it is subsidized through the government. Yeah, that doesn't matter in the grand scheme, because in the grand scheme, it is still a communist company. What China's doing right now is they are effectively attempting capitalism through a communist lens. And that largely involves all these megacorps. They started out as just giant government funds. They have since managed to survive on their own, and they may be funded by themselves or their own profits. But at any point, at any time, the Chinese government can say, we want this, or we want you to do that, and they have to, because, once again, seize the means of production. That's how communism works. Again, that I have to explain that to people that say they're communists blows my mind, but here we are. So I absolutely understand why those companies and a lot of Chinese products like that are in talks of being banned from so many countries. The WHO, well, they out and out lied. They were effectively a propaganda piece for China, to the point where any country that was starting to do any preparedness before March was told that they were racist against China. And now here we are. America made up 50% of the WHO's funding, and now that we pulled out, so I really hope that China helps foot your bill, WHO. And that's another thing I've noticed, and I'm going to just do a small little segue here. Why is it all these global organizations so heavily rely on U.S. funding? The WHO, World Health Organization, 50% funding from the U.S. The UN, and I did look up these numbers beforehand. The largest contributor to the UN is the United States. And we contribute more proportionally than China does. And then Japan contributes a hell of a lot more proportionally than it should, if we're going on the UN's own numbers. I've looked this up. The UN's latest numbers were, as of 2017, it's 80 trillion GDP. The US makes up about 21.5 trillion. China, something like 14.4, Japan, 8.5. Now, the U.S., according to percentage-wise, puts in slightly less than what would be proportional to their size. China puts in a hell of a lot less proportional to what their size is, and Japan puts in a hell of a lot more. But still, proportionally speaking, the U.S. puts in more than the next closest, China. So again, I find myself questioning how the fuck this works. And I think that they put in less proportionally globally because the UN is on fucking American soil. We built and housed the damn thing, and yet we still put in the most for it. What the hell? But it's this weird thing where all of these global organizations seem to rely heavily on the U.S. If not for the U.S. putting all this money in, they would not exist. And because they have so heavily turned to protecting China, we are now starting to pull out of them, which is what we should do. If these global organizations do not have the interest of each nation equivalent, let me rephrase that. If these global organizations do not equally represent each nation. If they show favoritism to one nation over another, i.e. China in this case, then it makes perfect sense to say, fuck you, not give them money, and pull out of it, because you are not being represented on a global scale. You are effectively funding something that works to your detriment. So yeah, I'm not shocked at all that the U.S. pulled out of the WHO, and at this rate, I will not be shocked if the U.S. just says fuck it and stops funding the UN. I'm really glad that the world is finally waking up to what a just global nightmare threat China is becoming, because China is effectively taking over in the way that I hate to say this, but is the correct way of doing it. They're literally buying up everything. The problem is they are buying it up in the guise of capitalism, i.e. letting all these corporations do it, when these corporations were originally funded by and are still controlled by the state. So it's not that corporations that are in China or Chinese owned are buying up these things. It's effectively that China itself is. A large chunk of Africa is now owned by China. A large chunk of North American real estate is owned by China. That is very fucking scary, and that could have just horrible repercussions down the line if we do not stop it, or at the very least slow it the fuck down. And then the last part of this, and this I actually really do want to know. I want to know why so many U.S. corporations work so heavily with China. I get the money aspect, but from just a IP aspect, China doesn't respect copyright for any country other than China. The only copyright that China protects is their own. They will literally steal your shit and repurpose it to their own, and then say it's a new thing and that it's theirs. Hell, Ubisoft is suing because there is a mobile Rainbow Six clone, and because they can't sue to the Chinese government because the Chinese government doesn't recognize outside trademark or copyright, they're having to sue Apple and Google because it's on their stores. Why, for example, the video game industry really does this. Why they work with China so heavily is beyond me, and I actually do believe that the recent anti-Chinese corporation sentiment that we've been seeing is making a lot of these companies just sweat bullets. I hope the early Chinese money was worth it, because you are fucking screwed. I don't want to see anything bad come to the Chinese people. Again, I'm going to make that very clear. My issue with China is the government, not the people. The problem is, I don't see a solution for the people that doesn't, unfortunately, involve a war of some kind. Hong Kong didn't try to assert independence. Hong Kong was protesting to keep the independence that it was required to in the deal for China to get Hong Kong back, and they fucking got destroyed for it. What does that say about mainland China? The average Chinese people outnumber the government officials by a magnitude that I cannot describe. But it's still the same thing of, because China so strictly regulates what everyone can or cannot do, because they have them so severely under the boot, everyone is afraid to do anything. If a few people rise up and protest, they will be brought down with the equivalent of a nuclear force. so everyone is afraid to do anything. That's the problem. And I don't see it getting any better for China anytime in the future. I think what would ultimately cause it is if the rest of the world just boycotted all Chinese products, removed all of their factories from China, just made it so that it is poison to do any business with China. That would ripple down to the citizenry being fucked financially. And I hate that, but that's the only way I can see to do it. And then that would cause all of them all at once to rise up. At least that's the only possibility I see. There may be others. I just don't see them in the moment. And I really do hope that China actually becomes democratic at some point in the future. More democracy is never a bad thing. More individual freedoms are never a bad thing. More human rights are never a bad thing. I never understand people arguing against that. So I do hope that we are actually at a point where we are seriously looking into China, Chinese products, Chinese companies, and saying, fuck it, and just not doing business with them anymore. Maybe that will lead to freedom for Chinese citizens. I can dream, you know? This has been Math Machine, laughing that it took China putting their thumb down on a population of about 10, 20 million. I forget exactly how big Hong Kong is. For the rest of the world to finally go, yeah, no. That's just, I'm amazed it was that one that finally did it, but I guess beggars can't be choosers. Peace out.